here we have this one, skull damage suggests Neanderthals, whichever one you want to go with, led no more violent lives than other humans. So what's going on with the article evidently is that it used to be thought that Neanderthals were much more violent, kind of more the apish kind of brutal, killing each other, fighting, and so forth.
I remember going to a museum and seeing them look like sort of half human, half ape brutes, sort of stooped over, ugly-looking creatures.
Really hairy. But now they're recognizing the skulls of Neanderthals are very similar to the skulls of other humans living at around the same time. They were no more, no less violent than humans. Humans are humans.
So this article says that they actually found when they looked at their skulls, and looks like some of them were probably, killing each other and bashing each other on the head, but they are no more violent than people today.
Right.
Which is not surprising because we're all sinners.
We're all sinners.
Humans have always been
since Adam and
sinners.
Eve, we've got sin nature, or all sorts of violence. We had violence before the flood, violence since the flood, and we shall see it today.
So it's interesting when you read these sort of articles where, they used to say that Neanderthals were sort of, these brutish creatures and so on, and now they're talking about Neanderthals as ancient humans. Well, they're saying Neanderthals and ancient humans are alike.
Well, the more we study
Neanderthals, that's because humans and humans are alike.
That's right.
Do you realize that humans are like humans? Has everyone realized that? Did you know that?
Well, one of the things it says here in the article, it says, males suffered the bulk of harmful head knocks. Now, I've seen a lot of videos of why men die sooner than women. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with some of those. I can see this happening. I really can.
Yeah. And the more we study Neanderthals, we recognize in their culture, they buried their dead, they played instruments, they did nice artwork, they used makeup, they were fully human. And so it's fun to watch the evolutionists have their view evolve as they study Neanderthals a little bit more and gets more biblical.
Okay.
All right, this is from Science News. Rare fossil bird deepens mystery of avian extinctions. And what it is, they suspect that some of these birds that we have today, or the majority of the birds today, actually go back to basically a single type of bird. They suggest that actually existed before the dinosaurs.
Are you saying that birds came from birds?
Yeah, this is what I don't understand. Don't the evolutionists say that dinosaurs evolved into birds?
That's right. That's what we hear a lot. Not all evolutionists believe that, but here's what they say in the very first sentence, in case there's any confusion.
Right.
Today's birds descend from a small number of bird species living before the dinosaur extinction. So birds came from birds.
That's incredible. That's like saying humans are related to humans.
Well, it is. Yeah.
Did you just say that?
Yeah, I did in the last article.
Yeah.
And now birds came from birds. These are incredible articles, aren't they?
Now, there's this misconception. A lot of people think that in the secular worldview that they have dinosaurs going all the way up, and 65 million years ago you have some sort of an extinction event, and the dinosaurs that were evolving into birds, some sort of theropod, picks up from that line. But that's actually not what they're holding to. They actually hold that if you go back further in the fossil record, there was some sort of dinosaur previously had evolved into a bird, and it's that bird line that survives that and gives rise to all the birds that are around today. That's
well, the interesting thing is they say that this bird they're supposedly 70 million years old. They said it was obviously a very strong flyer.
Yeah.
So it had fully evolved.
Right. And what's interesting is, velociraptors, which people are trying to put feathers on a velociraptor, thinking it's on its way evolving to a bird, by their own scenario, lived at about the same time, about 70 million years ago, in that viewpoint.
Again, it just shows the inconsistency of evolutionists, and they're changing their stories all the time. And
that's right. Well, what's interesting? They actually found a fossil of a parrot buried with a dinosaur. A parrot jaw. And yet parrots still exist today. So at least that one has survived.
Well, here's the interesting thing. You started off by saying they say birds came from those birds, right?
Yeah.
And then they say in this article, all birds evolved from feathered theropods, which means all birds evolved from dinosaurs. That's what they're saying.
Well, it's also interesting when you read the actual research and what they say in the article, you don't typically find really good fossils of birds. It's usually one particular bone, one leg bone, not much to work with, so it leaves it wide open to imagination. So they were so astounded when they found this particular specimen because the fossil was so good and so clear you could really study it well. And when they could study it well and observe it clearly, guess what they found out? It was a bird.
Well, let me tell you what this article ends with.
They said they wouldn't have been able to distinguish it from a modern bird.
And to be fair to them, we understand why they stretch so hard to make this evidence fit their worldview. They're starting with an anti-biblical worldview.
Right.
So they're interpreting the evidence through that lens, and that's why their conclusions are so off.
So it says this at the end of this article. It is likely that if you saw one in real life and just glanced at it, you wouldn't be able to distinguish it from a modern bird
Yeah.
because it looks like a bird.
Yeah. Well,
It's true.
it says all birds evolved from feathered.
I'm confused.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's what the article says. It says all birds evolved from from feathered theropods, the two-legged dinosaurs like T-Rex, beginning about 150 million years ago. Now here's the problem with that. Even in their own reckoning by the dating system and so forth, Archaeopteryx, a true bird, by their standard, was living 150 million years
With
ago.
the dinosaurs.
And there's another bird 10 years before that one that actually existed. So there were birds before that point. And they're trying to make the argument that something like a theropod, like a T-Rex-like creature, evolved into birds, and all the other birds that were there.
Do you know what makes more sense?
That
God created all the flying creatures on day 5.
Yep.
Makes a lot of
And
sense.
then all the land creatures on day 6.
Well, and real science will confirm
Right.
that again and again.
Right.
as
And when we
see
look
it
at the
studied
majority
out.
of the fossil record that's out there, that's a record of the flood of Noah's day. This is the stuff that wasn't on board Noah's Ark that died out. And so
And
when
they even
we see
acknowledge an
that
event
type
in
of
history
stuff-
where there was a mass
Yeah,
extinction.
they're talking about a mass
here.
extinction.
Hey, Bo, do you remember that article about the DeLorean?
Yes.
And we're talking about whether you could go into the future. So here we have someone from Australia, from Brisbane, who said, we're in the future over here in Australia, 5 a.m. Friday over here.
That's right.
He must have got in the DeLorean.
That's right. They must have done
They
that.
must have
Yeah.
done that. That's incredible.
So if you want to know what the
Yeah.
weather's going to be like tomorrow, we should ask people in Australia, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? Because they're
Sunny,
already,
hot.
it's already,
That's right, yeah.
because it's already tomorrow.
And something might kill you in
Yeah.
Australia. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now this one.
Well, yeah, this one from Fox News. Did a mysterious extinction event precede Adam and Eve?
Okay, so let me explain this one. This one gets sort of complicated, okay? And in fact, this is based on an item that came out basically in May. And we've actually already had an article on our website dealing with this by Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, who has a PhD from Harvard University.
Right.
But this was all over the news just recently, and they said, oh, scientists have found when you look at DNA and mitochondria and so on, there was this great big extinction event for animals that preceded Adam and Eve and so on. Actually, to explain it all in a nutshell, mitochondria is sort of like the energy part of the cell that it helps with making sure that the cell has energy and so on. It's like an energy factory, if you like.
Because cells are very complicated.
Kind of like
Cells are
my
very
son.
complicated.
Yeah.
He's
And
an
in
energy
mitochondria, there's DNA, and that DNA is maternal DNA. It only comes through the female, and so for that reason, it's very, very
Passes
stable.
from mother to
And so these scientists were really shocked because they actually studied the mitochondrial DNA, one little section of it. They call it barcoding. And so they took one little section that codes for an enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase, and they took that little section, barcode, and they actually looked at 100,000 species of critters, which is quite a big sample, 100,000 species. But here's what they found, that there are differences in that DNA down to the level where they actually could actually find they equate with actual species, even different species within what we called a kind. And people were shocked that this DNA in the mitochondria for this little section that codes for this enzyme, actually you could look at it and determine the actual species at a species level. And they were shocked at that, but how could that be for a start?
So
And
basically
then,
their prediction was wrong initially, and so they're just trying to take the data and try to reinterpret it in another fashion. Then.
well, they are. And what they did when they looked at that, they noticed even within a species there are some differences, slight differences, because the mutation rates, over time there's more and more mutations and so on. And so then they said, okay, let's take humans. When you look at humans, and they accept evolution, and they say, oh, modern humans evolved 200,000 years ago, so let's look at the mutation rate, and let's look at these, and what they concluded, and here's what they said: there had to be a big extinction event 200,000 years ago, and so that as a result, the species we have today have developed over 200,000 years and came from this big extinction event where a lot of the creatures were all wiped out.
Yeah.
Well,
so really, it sounds to me like what they did is, they looked at the mutation rate and say, okay, we're getting some similar things with the animals, and then they just jump out of the field of genetics, jump over to say the secular view of geology, and say, well, according to the evolutionary model and all the secular geologists, humans have been around for 200,000 years. So let's just apply the animal line almost equivalent to the human line.
But here's what we found. Dr. Nathaniel Jensen has been working on genetics, and he's looked at mitochondrial DNA and of humans, and when you actually look at the mutation rate, you realize that what we see, the variation you see there in the mitochondrial DNA in humans, goes back 6,000 years. Not 200,000 years.
Well, the number 200,000 comes from the assumption of being connected to an ancient ancestor in an evolutionary worldview and long ages.
So it's kind of circular.
Well, and that's because they have been able to sequence the entire DNA in mitochondria. Well, that hasn't been done in 100,000 animals, but they have done it in a few animals.
Right.
And it seems that mutation rate is the same as what you sort of see. Well, actually, in animals, it's 10 times more than what you see in humans.
Right.
And so what that means is that you could actually explain what you see in the mitochondrial DNA in animals goes back to even a less time than 6,000 years. And what we would say is there was a flood 4,300 years ago, and most of the species have formed within that 4,300 years. And the more you look at this mitochondrial DNA, the more you realize it actually, if anything, fits with the biblical timeline of a creation.
So this mysterious event is the flood.
The mysterious event of what they call a genetic bottleneck would be the flood, but not 200,000 years ago.
And that's actually after
It's only 4,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's after
4,300 years ago, after Adam and Eve.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
Did that all sound complicated?
It's the dates.
It's a complicated article to read. But basically, what it's saying is the more they study genetics and the more they look at what's happening, the more it doesn't fit with evolution.
Well, it's interesting.
And we see it fits with the biblical account.
You read the article, and the author says, many religious commentators will misunderstand this study to mean that species abruptly came into existence recently. And they say, to be clear, evolutionary biology is true. So they give lip service to evolutionary theory, even though the evidence is pointing to a recent event that caused
a lot of evolutionists actually wanted to go against this.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, do you know who else doesn't like this article?
Tell me.
Biologos.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And Biologos is a group that tries to convince the church to believe in evolution, and so they do not like this article, and they actually misrepresent. One of the scientists that writes about it misrepresents the article because he doesn't want it being used by people like us to say, see, actually the real evidence
confirmation of Scripture,
fits with Scripture, and that animals did not evolve.
Yeah.
They were created with genetic diversity, and there's been mutations because of sin, and it all fits with a biblical timeline.
If you start with a biblical worldview, then this makes sense within that biblical worldview. And there's a quote in here that's really fascinating I wanted to read before we went on. From the authors of the research, they said this, that this research confirms a biblical understanding in two notable ways. First, it affirms that we all and our fellow creatures on Earth arose from a recent profound creation event, orchestrated by an unknown mechanism. And second, the DNA barcodes reveal that species are quantized instead of being a continuum of animal variations, as one might expect within millions of years of gradual evolutions. Creatures fall into very distinct, widely separated populations, which the Bible describes as kinds, that comes from the Hebrew word men. That's all in the article, and it's consistent within that biblical worldview.
So if they got the dates right, it would actually probably...
Yep.
Well, let's get on to talk about something else that people really...
You want to know something a little bit more lighthearted?
Really would identify with.
Okay.
I'm sure our viewers...
it's fitting we have an Australian in our audience here. Why is wombat poop cube-shaped?
Have you Isn't that one of the questions you've always
It really
wanted to
is.
know?
I
If you
woke
look
up
it up,
last
it really
night
is.
wondering about that very.
Why is wombat
do
poo
people stay up
cube-shaped?
late, like pondering this kind of thing?
Is it because triangles are so hard to form?
You
Or
know,
would that
it
be-
could be.
First of all, in case people don't know what a wombat is, okay, a wombat is a marsupial that has a pouch like a kangaroo, but the pouch faces backwards.
And why does it face backwards?
Well, an evolutionist once said that. Why would God create a wombat with a backward-facing pouch? So the young have to jump in at the rear end, right? The reason is if it faced forwards, because they tunnel under the ground, the pouch would fill up with dirt and you get fossilized wombats,
Makes sense.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Those aren't near as
as I
cute.
say to my grandkids,
Right.
it's designed to do what it does do, what it does do, it does do well, doesn't it? Don't you think it does do you? I do hope you do too, do you?
Okay.
I do.
Okay? So now I was thinking we should redo that rhyme. It's poo is designed to do what it does do, what it does. Is that
It
right?
does do it well. I'll say that.
So what they found
It comes
was,
out as a cube. It's a cube shape.
who would ever think that wombats had cube-shaped poo?
Yeah.
And they don't know why. Actually,
Well,
that's part
actually,
of the article.
yeah.
They're not really sure
They got
why
a
it comes
dead
out
wombat
cube-shaped.
and they looked at its intestines
Yeah,
and they
couple of
said
them.
there's certain design features in there that indicate that that's responsible for why it makes cube-shaped poo. So,
Or at least it's a good guess. They weren't really sure about
It's a
it,
good
right?
guess.
But they were saying it's a good
yeah.
guess.
The Australians in the audience, did you know wombats had cube-shaped poo? You did?
See, they knew that.
One of them did, one of
Yeah,
them
yeah.
didn't. They obviously need
did you watch-
counseling in their marriage. If they
Did you watch the little video on the website that goes along with this article? There's a lady who's doing some research here, and she comes across some wombat poop, and she's excited about it, and she's explaining how awesome it is that it's square and cubed, and how excited she is. And she goes on to say, "What an ingenious marvel of evolution over time that wombats make cubed poop." So she attributed the cubed
Attributes
poop
it to
to evolution.
But if evolution did it by chance random processes, wouldn't it be a circle?
I would think, maybe.
You'd think.
All right.
Yeah, wouldn't you think it'd be you wouldn't think it'd be a cube?
I
Sure.
don't know. I mean, my guess is if you're going to study this issue, you got to get to the root of it. And I guess that'd be the square root of this one. Sorry, my jokes get worse as they keep
Hey.
going.
I got
You know-
so many
you know what?
jokes that
Actually-
I'm gonna hold off.
Poo is an important topic because
How many times have we said the word poo?
but
That's what I want to know.
it's discussed in the Bible. It is
It's true. Okay.
True.
with rabbits. See, one of
yeah,
the
true
things
with
secularists you read on atheist websites, they say the Bible's wrong because if you look at some translations when it's talking about the hair, it actually says it chews the cud. You know, in the Old Testament there, and they say, but it doesn't chew the cud.
it doesn't bring it
like
up
a
through its
cow.
mouth, yeah.
A cow, you know, regurgitates its food and chews it and swallows it again. But actually, if you read the Hebrew carefully, if you literally translate the sentence, it says, a hare eats that which is brought forth again. And what it does is, the first lot of pellets that it excretes, it eats them. So it eats that.
Right.
So it has
It goes to the bathroom two different ways.
poo 1 and poo
It
2.
eats one of them.
So poo 1 it eats, and poo 2 it doesn't.
And the rabbits are smart enough to know which one to eat.
So see, I'm talking about wombat cube
Yeah.
poo. You can talk about rabbits and the Bible, and actually in dealing with something that the evolutionists or the atheists claim the Bible is wrong about.
And the Bible's actually quite
and
accurate.
the Bible's
on it,
actually quite
The
it's
atheists
totally
will love
accurate.
this episode of
They
Answers
will.
News.
They will.
Oh my goodness.
So
Ken Ham talks about poo for 10 minutes. That's the headline coming.
anyway.
By the way, I wanted to say hey to Hannah, who came over from your Facebook over to the Answers one. Also, Marty. Hey, guys. Glad you guys are watching and learning about poo on Answers News.
So there we are. Let's go on to something else.
Can you imagine being a researcher having to, what's your job? I'm going to go study this wombat. Don't ask anymore.
Let's move on
Okay.
to this one from Fox News. Prehistoric Swiss Army knife found in cave, and it's stunning the experts, according to the article. So, Bodie, what was happening here with this particular article?
Okay, well, they found some pretty fascinating prehistoric tools that do multiple purposes.
Okay.
Sometimes up to four different purposes is what I was reading in here. And that's kind of fascinating to be able to carry one tool to be able to do cutting and scraping and all these other things. So they're
Yeah.
dubbing that the Swiss Army knife. It doesn't fold.
And how
like-
old did they think
like all
these
this.
tools were when they found them?
Well,
in the evolutionary worldview?
they conclude, and of course, we question these dates up and down. They conclude
Right.
that they're 80 to 170 1,000 years old. And it shocks them because, well, this is the kind of tools that you'd see from people only 30 to 40,000 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, the dates are totally questionable.
Sure.
These are post-flood peoples that use these. So it's post-flood, post-Babel, as people are spreading out about the world. And so they find these different items. And to me, they're fascinating. It's a sign of man's brilliance.
Do you know what is amazing to me? I'll tell you what is amazing. These scientists will find these tools, and they're stone tools, right? And somebody has carved them and so on, and they say, look at this. And look at all these tools here. We didn't expect to find these tools where they found them there at that time, because they thought that people didn't evolve that ability until much later. But the point is, they look at these rocks and they say, an intelligence did that. Humans did that. Then they look at the humans. Chance did that.
Yeah.
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 And yet, you know, this may surprise our audience, but a human body is a little bit more complex than a rock.
It is.
Well, some humans.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah. Okay. I won't do that.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking of sort of Washington D.C. at that stage, but no, humans are incredibly complex. You think of just a cell.
Yeah.
Is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even know how complex it is. DNA is phenomenally complex. Yet they look at that, these secularists, and they say, chance, 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 no God,
Right.
no intelligence. And they look at a rock that shows it's been shaped a bit into a
to do
tool,
certain
and
features.
suddenly an intelligence did that.
It reminds me of 1 Corinthians 1:20, where it says, God has made foolish the wisdom of the world. And again, we see there just that active suppression of truth. It is clear from creation there is a God, but there's that suppression. And so you go to great lengths to explain away the biblical worldview however you can. And that's what we see over and over again with this.
Hey, you know what? We started something, because I got about 500 comments about wombat poo.
About to,
We have got to get onto a different topic. Okay.
somebody said here to Bodie, no Bodie, about your poo joke about the cube or the root or whatever. No Bodie, it's the cube root is what they said
The
to you.
cube root, there
The
we
cube
go.
root, so you need to have that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
See, people, you know what? You must admit, everyone who's heard this program knows something about wombats I'll never forget. You must admit that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but yes,
Yeah,
it's true.
unfortunately.
So,
All the
okay.
things.
So let's go on to the new transitional form that Elon Musk is worried about.
Oh yeah.
All right, Fox News. Elon Musk thinks humans will have to merge with machines to overcome their existential threats.
Which you've already done that, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I got
Yeah,
a defibrillator in here. Dr. Georgia Purdom, when she's here, she's got a cochlear implant.
Yeah.
And, you know, all sorts of people have wound pumps and, you know, things to deliver insulin and things like that. So, yeah, we're already on the way. We're a head start.
You're evolving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm top of the food chain. Yeah. I don't know about that.
I'm just sitting here thinking I'm just healthy.
No. You have a cell phone attached to you and a microphone all the time. No. But
Yeah, but no. So what's he's worried about? Maybe that AI will. In the future, maybe by even 2030, I think if I read the article correctly, or the other article, 2030, the AI of the world may start to take over.
Artificial intelligence.
yeah.
AI is artificial intelligence. They're worried
Population.
artificial intelligence will take over, and we'll need to merge with artificial intelligence to stop our own extinction.
And he's suggesting we take preemptive steps to be sure that we're not
I
overtaken.
tell you the preemptive step he
Yeah.
needs to take, to put his trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, because
Yeah.
the time is coming when God's going to return to this earth, and Jesus is going to come back and judge
yeah.
this universe with fire.
Well, I mean, clearly he's thinking in terms of an evolutionary worldview.
Sure.
One of the things he says here is
Yeah.
when a species of primate, Homo sapiens, becomes much smarter than the other primates, it pushes the other ones into a very small habitat. You know, he's thinking in terms of an evolutionary worldview. Really what he needs to do is needs to go back and have a reset. Go back, start with Scripture, and that actually makes sense of intelligence. It actually makes sense of why the world is the way it is. And you know what? I mean, I'd like to see people, you know, step back and repent and get back to the
And
truth of the Word
regardless of how much memory they put in a machine, regardless of how they program it, artificial intelligence is not made in the image of God.
No.
Only humans are made in the image of God, and only humans can think in that
Right.
abstract way.
And
It
we
says
may-
here,
yeah.
last year he called artificial intelligence the biggest risk we face as a civilization, AI is a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization. I've got news for him. The biggest risk, if you want to call it that, we face as civilization is sin, and not dealing with sin, and not putting our faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, and it's interesting. I think Stephen Hawking's had a similar fear about what was to come in the future with AI. And it's, if you don't fear God, you will fear something else. And that's what we see again and again. Fear God in a sense of respect, honor, submit to. And you see that fear play out different ways.
See, in an evolutionary worldview, why would you care anyway? You know, if you're going to be dead and gone in the future, and you know, so what?
Yeah, so why does he even worry? So what? If a man becomes extinct, I mean, he's going to die, and he thinks that's the end of him, and there's no eternity, then why does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, in 280 trillion years, we're all supposed to be gone in their worldview.
I still
anyway,
never understand that about the atheists that so oppose Christians and, you know, the LGBT movement and all the rest of it. I mean, if when they die, that's the end of them, why does it matter?
Yeah.
Well, it shows the fact they're made in the image of God. They cannot get away from
In
it.
their
It's a
heart of
spiritual
hearts,
issue.
they know.
They know.
And they want to suppress
So,
it.
do you want to do
Let's hit
one more?
One more just in
All
time
right.
for Thanksgiving. A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving is now racist.
Yeah, you heard it.
Charlie Brown
Thanksgiving
the
is
show.
now considered racist by some people.
You know, this is typical, though, of a lot of the college-age students, high school students today. A lot of these people from secular colleges, they watch one Charlie Brown program. They don't do any research. They don't watch the other programs.
Sure.
And they see one particular character with dark skin, and they think that the person who actually put this together was racist, when in actual fact, if you read all the background to it and watch the other programs, you'll see that he was actually dealing with overcoming racism.
Well, and what they're
That's
talking, if you go to the next slide,
Charles
people
Schultz,
can see that what happened is here's a picture from the show, and you got the character Franklin, I believe is his name, who's sitting on the one side of the table by himself in a long chair. And the people who are upset about this are saying, see, that proves that the draw of this cartoon
Nobody wanted to
was
sit by
racist.
this boy,
Nobody wanted to
so
sit by
you know
him.
he's racist and stuff.
And then come to find out, you do a little bit more research. There are plenty of other shows where Franklin's sitting by lots of people, including Charlie Brown, at the table in prominent roles.
He was one of his good friends the
He
whole
was.
time. Now here's the thing.
They say, for instance, during the farewell dinner, about 1 hour and 5 minutes into 1972's Snoopy Come Home, Franklin was seated on the same side of the table as Charlie Brown, Lucy, and Frida in a regular chair, and actually. The historical significance of the character Franklin cannot be understated. It says his creation was demanded
by Charles Schultz.
By Schultz, yes, because
he put him in the cartoon, and then the cartoon publisher, asked him, "Are you sure you want to do this? Put this character in the cartoon?" He said, "If you don't put the character in like I drew it, I'm going to walk."
In fact, the Schultz Museum also celebrated Franklin's 50th anniversary in July. He has never been treated like a token black character added for cheap lip service to diversity, has always been a valued member of the Peanuts gang. But you know, one of the things we're noticing more and more is some of the younger generations who don't do research, they just act like many of the journalists do today, and they just get a little bit of information, misinterpret it, and then they make some accusation. In actual fact, if they did their research, you know who they should be banning? Charles Darwin.
Charles Darwin.
Because if you read Charles Darwin's Descent of Man, that was published 12 years after The Origin of Species, it's racist. It calls Caucasians a superior race.
Yeah.
It says that
they should exterminate all the others.
And they should exterminate. It says that the Australian Aborigines were closest to the ape-like creatures.
Yeah. You know, it's sad to see this. I think sometimes people are trying to find racism in places that it isn't there. And what that is, that's a sign that you need to step back and go, hold on, and be honest with yourself. Are you looking for racist things? I look at this image up here, and you know what? I see one race, the human race. Yeah, the cartoon figures of it, but there's one race, the human race. Yeah. And what we need to do is stop saying, hey, let's start separating people out and dividing them into a multitude of races. That's the kind of stuff Darwin did. That's the kind of stuff a number of early evolutionists did. Now, don't get me wrong, they weren't the ones who started racism. It was around before that, but it exploded as a result of an evolutionary worldview. And there are evolutionists who've agreed with this. Stephen Jay Gould, who was a professor at Harvard University, died a few years ago, well, a number of years ago now. But you know, he actually said racism increased by orders of magnitude when people started to believe in an evolutionary worldview. What we need to do is get back to the authority of the Bible. There's one race, the human
Well,
race.
here
and
at
that's how we need to
here
look
at the
at
Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, we have exhibits that help people understand. If you want to overcome racism, you have to really get back to the right foundation, the right history, and that is we're all descendants of Adam and Eve. We're all one blood. We're all equal before God. We all have the same problem, sin. We all need the same solution, Jesus Christ. And actually, I just came out with a brand new book called One Blood for Kids. It's really good for the whole family, and it deals with all this issue. It helps people understand we're all the same skin color, just different shades.
of it.
We're all one race.
And that book's good for adults too.
It is good
It
for
really
adults,
is.
and have a lot of information in here.
Yeah, it's really good.
Filled with it actually talks about the pigment melanin in your skin and how it can have more or less and be a darker shade or lighter shade. Deals with issues of slavery. Biblical slavery is nothing like the slavery they talk about today, and so on.
Really good.
And then we also
resource.
have the book One Race, One Blood. Ken Ham and Dr. Charles Ware teamed up to put this book together. It's excellent for teens and adults. And the last one is a book called Searching for Adam. And this is powerful if you're thinking in terms of, say, Neanderthal, as well as did Adam and Eve exist? Were there extinction events before Adam and Eve and things like that? This is a book you want to get to. This one's written at a little bit higher level, but Searching for Adam, Dr. Terry Mortensen
It's really well
on
done.
staff at AIG
It really
was
is.
the editor of that book.
You know, it's interesting. Somebody here made a comment. Charlie Brown doesn't have any Asian friends. Is that racist?
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting. There are times I put photographs of our staff on the internet, and the secularists go on there and say, there's no black people in there. Not that there's any black people, because there's no white or black. We're all brown. But and they say, you obviously are a racist organization. But there are people there who are Hispanic. We have staff. One of our staff members is from India. But they don't worry about any of
We have all
that.
sorts here.
You know,
Somebody just joked on here. Bodie's wearing a black shirt and Brian's wearing a light shirt. Therefore, we're racist.
I mean,
I was wondering about you. You know, I didn't know.
probably the same people that watched that Charlie Brown
No,
movie
it
and
was
claimed
Hannah.
that
She's
are
just
probably.
joking. She's making the point.
But you know what it
Yeah.
does mean?
Right.
If we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, it means I'm related to you. And you're American and I'm Australian. So how can that be?
Are you sure we're related?
I know.
Don't say it.
Well, I can tell that because you're a sinner, and I know that.
Sure.
And we're all sinners. So,
All right, well, we've gone over time, so we're going to sign off here, and we wish you the best. God bless you, and we'll see you back on
Monday.
Monday.
There
I
you
have to
go.
remember which
There
day
you
it
go.
is.
Yeah, Monday.
All right, God
Thanks,
bless you
guys.
guys.
Have a great day.